Hi everyone, this is Betsy Ryan responding to our Module 5 discussion and reflection from this week's reading. For the first point I wish to respond to this week, I chose what is the significance of culture in my setting. What I found interesting in our readings this week that Hofstede's cultural framework was mentioned, and I've had some experience with that. I've taken the cultural inventory, so I'm somewhat familiar with the values that are typical for an American, that are typical for me. And I thought it was interesting that in Gundarwana's research that she found that the high power distance cultures, such as the Sri Lankan, Moroccan cultures, felt that the online medium actually was an equalizer in the classroom, as opposed to having the same power distance, distance between a professor or an instructor over the students being felt in the typical classroom. So I thought, so that was surprising to me, and so that spurred me on to continue reading about cultural experiences in online courses. And I was able to find this article here. I'm going to screen share in just a second. So cultural differences in online learning, international student perceptions. In this article here, one of the researchers actually is based at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business, which is fairly well-regarded MBA program. And they actually did case studies, did some focus group studies with students in the program. So that they could get a better sense of what was happening with international students from China and India, who are really predominantly represented in their MBA program and in the MBA program that I work with as well. An interesting theme emerged in their studies is that while the students identified awareness of differences, cultural differences between Chinese and Indian students and American students in terms of competitiveness, openness, and willing to basically say no to different things. All students reported that was actually advantageous for their development because it exposed them to different cultures. But some drawbacks was that some cultural clues in the case studies used in class were somewhat lost to them. So if the instructors had taken more time to kind of be aware that the cases that they're using may not have the same context culturally, outside of the U.S., that would have been helpful. And even a lot of the cases were U.S.-based employers, so maybe even instead of having the instructor choose cases where they maybe were biased to select a U.S.-based firm, that they can actually source examples, case studies from the students, so that it has more relevancy to these students, which kind of leans back to what we were discussing about how students, especially adult learners, need to have some autonomy in what they're studying. So all in all, this was a great article to read this week to kind of revisit how adult learners kind of bring their whole self to the classroom, and how culture should be neglected in that. Okay, moving on to the next question here. Considering the global span of distance education, which of the international cases presented in Moore and Kearsley's reading did you seek out or find most interesting, and why? I was very interested in some of the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, and what they do for women in terms of education. I'm aware that there are same-sex segregated universities, so single-gender universities in Saudi Arabia that are currently operating. And I was aware of at universities that were traditionally male-only, allowing women to sit in on lectures in separate areas with closed-circuit televisions. And so in order to learn a little bit more about the history of that, one of the things I found in my research was this article, sort of a review of women's education in Saudi Arabia, and where these authors see see the systems going. They did say that distance and online education, higher education specifically, there are more opportunities open, but there's still both cultural barriers, such as there are women students who report even leaving chat rooms when they know that there are unrelated male family members present, because that would violate their sense of keeping separate. And the other piece that was really interesting was, of course, the fact that while women being unable to travel or drive freely has limited their access to physical schools, but that seems to be opening up, or at least moving in a way that would allow women to access to physical schools. So maybe in the end, it won't be as needed as once predicted as the only way for women to get education. Really interesting article. If you want to see for yourself what the history of women's higher education has been in Saudi Arabia specifically, but also with much attention given to distance education. And then finally, the last thing that caught my attention, I guess anything else I found interesting from the readings, was while browsing the UNESCO website, I ran across an article on digital credentials. And so, as you probably have heard, there's been a lot of attention on micro-credentials coming kind of out of the MOOC space. So these are not bachelor's degrees, not master's degrees, but rather certifications, badges that can be easily earned, and especially for adult learners, continuing learners, vocational rehab, people reentering the workforce are able to earn these quickly online, but there isn't really any good central source for credentialing. The language is quite varied, just as like distance and online education had a lot of difficulty in their terminology. The field of digital credentials and badges is even more wide open. And there's just a lot of confusion, maybe even a lack of trust into what qualifies as a solid credential. So in this report, it highlighted the fact that as one of the methods to ensure quality in these educational credentials is to use blockchain. So obviously blockchain has its origin in the finance area, but starting to expand into other ways of using data. So this could be the answer to this kind of diffuse badges and other credentials out there, as being, having a unifying source to verify the content. And again, exploring this further, came across that Malta has begun a nationwide rollout of blockchain certificate credentials for education and employment for all its citizens. This is a really interesting article, and it just goes back to just only February of this year. So basically, so diplomas, school leaving certificates, transcripts will be issued to students in an instantly verifiable digital format, very portable. MIT has been using it. There is also some other universities in Europe, such as the Open University UK, had a pilot program to explore this option, and the University of Nicosia in Cyprus has also done something similar. So I'm really excited to see where this goes as far as being able to have portability of credentials. I think especially as we move into a new era in employment, basically the next industrial revolution, people are going to need to re-up their skills, going to have proof of that, and we want something that would be reachable quickly and global. The current system of student records is really unsustainable. In my own work, I've encountered students who have difficulty obtaining transcripts from unstable countries, or maybe they only were issued the one diploma that they have to retain for their entire lifetime, and sometimes those single diplomas go missing. So let's get away from that, not only for sustainability in paper, but for the fact that it's just not a secure and a very viable way to hold on to educational credentials. Okay, so I've talked enough, and looking forward to hearing your responses to this week's readings. Have a good night.